Today, I'm with Chuck Darrow, and Chuck is actually a former client of mine who also wrote an article. And we're here to talk about his experiences with past life regression, his experiences with me, but also some really incredible things he experienced on his own before he even met me. And we're just going to go into our favorite subject right now, which is past lives, past life regression, past lives, and all that good stuff. So
Yeah.
before we start, Chuck, I just want to say you have a really interesting bio that you sent me, and
Some
you've
of
been
it's even
covering.
true.
Yeah, a made up bio. Just put it into AI and ask them what your
Right.
bio is, and they'll give you something grand. So you've been covering the Philly and Atlantic City scene for almost 50 years as a
Actually,
journalist.
last fall was 50 years. Yeah.
Okay. Oh, you
Started
need
when,
to
I'm not
update
that
your
old, though.
bio.
I started when I was 18, just when people know that. I'm not as old as this.
Wow. You're not
But I'm
102.
old. Right. But I'm old, but not that old.
So you've been a journalist, broadcaster, and a lot of other things. I don't know if we have enough time, so I'm not
Yeah.
going to cover all the things you've done, but highlights. You've published articles on Live Aid, which was one of the places that Live Aid was right near where we're recording this, which was the old JFK in Philadelphia. You've covered the Super Bowl. You've interviewed, among many people, Sir Paul McCartney, Oprah, Jerry Seinfeld, and me. I'm one
Yeah.
of the
Yeah.
people that
And
you've
you.
interviewed.
And I got to tell you that pretty much of that, at least of that quartet of people, when I entered the article I interviewed you for was remains 12 years later was in SJ. Just to give a little plug if anyone's interested. SJ magazine, and you can search. If the name of the article was Total Recall, and it wasn't about reincarnation as much as it was about what you do, Barbara, which is using past life therapy to help people get over whatever issues they need to get over. And you were the key to that article because you were gracious enough to have me interview two of your clients and actually sit in on one client's regression, which to me, the article wouldn't have been a tenth as good as I think it was. So I'm forever indebted to you for that. But you can just go. He said, if the easiest way to find it online and how I do it, I just Google Chuck Darrow, Darrow, Total Recall. It'll come right up. And if you're interested in what Barb does and why she does it and how it helps people, it's really, I do recommend the article. It's a little long, but I think that you'll find it interesting and hopefully entertaining.
It
So,
was both, I think. And that was the first time anybody had ever formally interviewed me. So
yeah,
I was thrilled. And I was also really thrilled just to be able to share my passion, my interest, and what I knew. Even then, it was 2013 because I still have the magazine in my room in my office. And I was just so happy that somebody was interested in it the way I was interested in it and what I was seeing time after time in my office with my clients. And after that article came out, the day after it came out in South Jersey SJ Magazine, I told you I was inundated with
yeah,
emails and phone calls, and people were so curious and excited about this. And so many people found me, and I helped so many people because of you in
great.
that
Well,
article.
that was kind of the point to let people out there know that, hey, you know what? If you're not familiar with this, you might be interested in this. And that was,
Mm-hmm.
kind of the main point that there is an alternative way to deal with both physical and psychological issues that you might have. So,
Exactly. So, Chuck, while you're here, and because I worked with you and I know about your past lives, and we still have the recording from it, I re listened because I hadn't heard it in over 10 years and re-listened and remembered the different lifetimes that we went to and what happened with you and how much, as I was listening to them and then also looking at your bio, so many things to me made sense. But we can discuss that as we're discussing those
sure.
different lifetimes because you can put them together. It's like pieces of the puzzle.
And if you don't mind, because there's something that I didn't really think about until the past couple of days, preparing to do this today, that As you know, as you read, I've done kind of a lot of different things. I've done stand-up comedy. I've also been a comedy writer. I play in Pure Petty. Please let me give a plug for the world's greatest Tom Petty tribute band. If you're a Tom Petty,
Yay.
purepettyband.com. We're playing all, especially if you're in the Philadelphia area. We have a whole bunch of gigs in the next 5 6 months all over, whether it's the main line or South Jersey. May 3rd, we're actually in Atco. So hopefully, if you're a Tom Petty, if you're not, then don't, because you come see us. If you don't like Tom Petty, it'll be a very long night. But if you're a Tom Petty fan, I think you'll really appreciate it. But the point is that I've dabbled or done a lot of different things, not just one or two things. And I think that's because, as I discovered in our session and our the regressions that we did, that at least I don't know if my most recent lifetime, as discovered when in our session, and then the other one of the other two that we did. So it appears quite possibly that they were my two most recent lifetimes, and I died in my 20s both times. So I
Mhm.
obviously I was unfulfilled because I
Yes.
never got to live those lives out in a normal way. And I kind of was thinking about that perhaps that's why I've done, gotten involved in so many. Now, of course, they all have a thread, which is all in the creative arts.
Yes.
Uh, but the point being that I suspect that one of the reasons why I've tried to do so much in this lifetime is because I never had the opportunity to do it in at least two previous lifetimes, and probably more, but two that we know of. So
That I'm so glad that you said you were just even thinking about that, because that was something I was going to bring up. That's such an important piece. And I've seen that over the years with people who have come to me. If they've had lifetimes where the soul didn't plan, oh, at 23, we're going to die in a war. It didn't plan that. So it's an unfulfilled lifetime because you didn't get to really express your purpose, your plan, your mission. And coming back, then, if you've had that happen a few times where it was unexpectedly cut short, the soul in this time is like, oh, I'm doing everything and anything because I need to catch up and I'm going to get as much in as I can. It feels
yeah,
that sense
yeah,
of,
and and I mean, and this I didn't think of until this moment, is that even as a kid, like in elementary school, when I kind of thought about, like, fantasized, like, as being an adult, it wasn't just being one thing. It was being a musician. It was, being a writer, I guess. But I guess, that's why, because I just didn't have the opportunity,
mhm.
their lives. Especially, again, the most recent one was only I died in 1947, I think it was, that I said anyway, and I was born in this life in 1956. So clearly, it was most likely my most recent life. And just, this time, hey, I'm gonna go for it.
Yes. Yeah.
I guess,
Let's,
without really thinking. I mean, that was just I never articulated it that,
mhm.
but it's just obviously why I went out on these different paths, I guess. So,
So let's go to the initial time. And I know your story from when I first met you, when you contacted me with interest in writing this article. And then we sat down and talked. And then we also did a regression with you.
right.
And let's talk about prior to that, though. What really kind of set you on this path, this interest, even
Well,
in past lives?
it's
They're not
really
exactly mainstream. And
no,
especially back then, they weren't.
it's really interesting because my mom believed in it. And I guess I would have been, I don't know exactly, but sometime probably 13 or 14 when she kind of told me about it and brought up the subject. And she explained, I don't remember a specific conversation, but I know that that's where I first learned about reincarnation. And it didn't wash for me at all. It made no sense. It was, it just seemed utterly ridiculous. And I kind of, I pushed it aside. I mean, it just wasn't part of my life in any way, shape, or form. My mom was, she was kind of eccentric, but in a good way. And she also believed, which I also kind of buy into, the whole ancient astronaut theory. She turned me on to that too, because she originally read von Daniken's Chariot of the Gods. And that, again, the plausibility of that or at least it makes, to me, that theory is at least and certainly a lot more plausible than the theory advanced by 5,000 years of religion, of
Yes.
organized religion. Be that as it may. So for the next 5, 7 years, again, I heard reincarnation reference, and I just, it's ridiculous. You're here, you're born, you die, and that's that. And I will never forget. I still get chill. I just got one now because it was such a turning point in my life. I can tell you exactly, not the date. I mean, it's easy enough to find out, but it was the night before Thanksgiving of 1976. So I was 20 years old. And do you remember? I'm sure you do the Tom. Well, again, you might be too young for this, actually. Now that I think of it, but Tom Snyder, the Tomorrow Show, which was the talk show he had after the Johnny Carson show
Mm-hmm.
every night on NBC. And one night he had a young woman who was just about my age, year or maybe either way. And she she wasn't selling anything. That was the first thing. It wasn't that she'd written a book or there was a TV show about it. She simply had a story, an interesting story to tell, and she told it. And her story was that when she was 17, she basically woke up one morning with an intense migraine. I don't know which temple, but let's just say the right temple was one of her temples. I mean, just debilitating. That's how awful it was. And of course, her parents took her to medical doctors, and they treated her with medicine and whatever. And the headaches were still there. The migraine was still there. Again, in that one specific spot. So at some point, medical doctors gave up because nothing was working. So maybe it's psychosomatic. They took her to psychologists. It didn't help her at all. The pain remained. And finally, and they also had her hypnotist on, her therapist on with her. She lived, by the way, it's important to note that she grew up in the suburbs of Cleveland, as I recall. And as a last resort, they, she underwent past life regression. And under hypnosis, she told how she was essentially a hooker in Cheyenne, Wyoming in 1902. Now then, you have to understand that in 1902, Wyoming wasn't even a state yet. So this really was the Wild West. And under hypnosis, she explained she was at a bar, instead of kind of hanging out in a bar one day. A gunfight broke out. Bullet hits her in the right temple. Now, the skeptic in me and most people, I'm sure, say, "Well, that's a really good story, but we don't know really how the brain works. It's something she could have been 4 years old, and that could have been on television.
Yeah.
Somehow that could have gotten into her subconscious, that story, and that's perfectly logical, and that makes a lot of sense. But and this was the epiphany for me. They not only did she say what her name was, she described exactly. And again, she was from Cleveland. She had never been anywhere near Wyoming, so she said she had no reason to lie. Again, because she wasn't selling anything. And she and her family went to Wyoming. She told them exactly where she was buried in her past life, and the name on the tombstone was the name that she said in under hypnosis, and that changed everything for me. That was it. I said, absolutely, this is what I've been looking for, because organized religion isn't doing it for me. It makes no sense to me. This makes sense. This explains, as I said before we started, that past lives, the concept of reincarnation, to me explains the otherwise inexplicable. And this young woman was a perfect example. There was no rational or that's not the word I'm looking for, but concrete reason for her. There was no medical reason. There was no psychological reason.
Right.
And then and of course, I don't have to tell you that the headaches disappeared when she realized that it was just her subconscious playing tricks on her that had nothing to do with her in this lifetime.
Yeah.
And from that moment, and then, I started to think about things and flashes of, deja vu that always stayed with me, and quote, dreams. And there were two in particular that I had both of them, I think, right around the same. Yeah, they would have been Yeah, they would have been, I guess I was probably around 17, so early 70s. But they weren't dreams. They didn't come to me as a normal dream. It was almost as if it was just I saw like a quick 1, 2, 3 movie clip, like a film clip, just and but I woke up and I was like, it just resonated within me so much, and it always stuck with me. And the first one was that I yeah, okay. So the first one was or well, I don't know chronologically, but one of them was that I was in an old style, either an ambulance or a hearse. That, and I'm kind of a car guy. I can identify cars from the 40s and 50s and 60s, so on. So I kind of knew, I recognized that this probably was in the 40s or early 50s. And I was just laying in the back of it, and at one point, I saw myself, and I had windows on the side, and I saw myself like kind of sit up, and I looked out, and I all I saw was like a street that had just a row of like brick warehouse type buildings, and that was it, and it was over. But something about that, it really stayed with me, not just for a day or a week, but for years. The other dream at around that same time was that I this was really bizarre to me because I was in a park like setting, a lot of trees, and there was some smaller buildings, but they were in classic Greek style, Greek temple style. But yet there was also a an expressway
Mhm.
behind this area with the trees and the buildings. And I thought, well, that's really bizarre because there weren't expressways in ancient Greece. So I was always kind of, confused and puzzled by that. And then, the more I thought about it, and I kind of thought maybe this has something to do with past lives. And then one of the lifetimes that you and I discovered together was that I was a sailor post World War II. I was too young to actually enlist in the army or in the military for World War II, and I was a sailor. And oh, okay. Actually, let me go back. I'm sorry. So that would have been like 72, 73. Ah, yikes. Sorry about that. I just dropped you. In 79, I got a job uh, that I was basically a messenger. And one of my regular stops was the Philadelphia Naval Base. And I had never, I mean, I knew it was there and I'd passed it before. I'd never actually gone on to the grounds of the naval base. Had no idea what was there. And and I just remember something in 77. So we'll finish with 79. I'm sorry. 18 functioning brain cells left. But 79, I got this job and I drive on the first time I drive on to the actual naval base, and it was still actually a federal installation. And I'm driving down one of the streets there, and I just like look to my left, and there is a street just like brick warehouses. 2 years earlier, I was visiting a friend in LA, and we spent the day. We drove down. I'd never been out to the West Coast at that time, really, outside of Los Angeles, that is. And we went down to San Diego, and San Diego's version of Fairmount Park is called Balboa Park. And we came in from the front, the main entrance, and there's a giant parking, as I remember it. You park in the front, you go in. We parked the car, and we're walking, and we kind of just we walk through the. I guess there's gates, and we walk into the what you call it. And what do I see? I see sort of a park like setting, lots of trees, and I see Greek style buildings. Now we can't see what's beyond because there's like a little bit of a bluff. So there's no way to see what is on the other side, on the far side of the. We can see the end of it, but we can't see what's below. And I turned to my friend, and I got like a chill, and I said, "Look, I've never been here before, right?" He goes, "Well, that's what you said. Well, why would you lie?" I said, "Of course, I've never ever been here. Do you know what's on the other side, the far side of the park?" And he goes, "No, because we came in from this side." I said, "I will bet you every single cent that I have on me that when we get to the far end and we look down, there will be an expressway." And sure enough, that's what it was. Now then, I started to think. So, what's the connective tissue here? What do would these two things have in common? Well, San Diego and Philadelphia, naval bases. And that's when I started to suspect that I had lived and died, and because in case people were confused, I did not die in battle, as I discovered in our session, is that I got hit by a car. I was on Liberty, and I was walking on Broad Street and got hit by a car somewhere, I guess Walnut or Chestnut Street, and died.
Yes,
And they brought me, but because I was a sailor, they brought me back to the naval base, and that's when I died obviously in the ambulance, and my soul, as it left, I saw myself and looked out, saw out the window. So that's what really, that. But I didn't know, I didn't do the regression until you said like 10 years ago. So now
exactly.
let's jump to 1980. I was working for a paper called the Philadelphia Journal, which was a daily paper. It only existed 4 years. My first real newspaper job. And one of the things that I did was I was the movie writer. And to this moment, there are two ways to promote a movie. I hope I'm not like talking too much because I have a tendency. So let me know if you need to steer me back. But movies are generally promoted, publicized in two ways. The first one is you take a star or two stars and the director, or whatever, a couple principals of the movie, and you put them on a plane and you send them. They go to Philadelphia and do interviews. They go to Baltimore, whatever, and do interviews. But they also have what's called junkets, where they invite media from around the country in North America, and sometimes the world, to congregate or convene in a central location, one location, generally in New York or LA, but not always. And there you have 60, 70, 100 reporters doing the interviews. So this one was summer of 1980. It was Cheech and Chong's second movie. I think it's called Cheech and Chong's Next Movie. And the schedule was that Friday night we arrived, and I guess they fed us, and then we went to a screening room and saw the movie, and then Saturday morning is the interviews. It's basically you sit at a large table with like 10 chairs in a ballroom. One chair is open, and every 20, 15 minutes, whatever, Cheech would sit down, then Cheech would get up, and Chong would sit down, like that. So anyway, the night before, I'm sitting in the screening room waiting for the movie to start, and there is a very large African American gentleman sitting next to me, and he's got like one of these James Earl Jones type, deep voices, and we start talking because that's what you do. First question: where are you from? Who do you write for? And he tells me that he was there representing the Chicago Defender, which is one of the most famous and important black newspapers in American history. But he says that's just kind of more of like a part-time job. I go, well, what do you do? He goes, I'm a hypnotist. And I said, really? Now, this is like I said, 4 years or so, 3, 4 years after I'd seen the Tom Snyder show. And I said, do you ever do past life regressions? And he said, all the time. Why? I said, well, I've always been interested in that. And he says, well, you want to do it? And I said, sure. And after the interviews that next afternoon, we did my first regression, and I was a Native American, but I was not Geronimo. I was not Crazy Horse. I did not have fight these epic battles, but I was apparently the medicine man ultimately in a very small. It wasn't even a tribe. It was. I mean, maybe I saw myself like 15 or so huts or teepee type, buildings, or whatever. But um, in the summer, now let's flash back to the summer of '73. I was a camp counselor, overnight camp. And the first night of camp, the ritual was once all the kids are finally settled down and you're pretty sure everyone's asleep, you roust them out of bed and you take them out for a bonfire. And the way it was configured, the bonfire, there was one section of bunks in a circle. And the bonfire was set and built between the bunks, the circle of bunks, and an open field. And I had the most insane, intense deja vu flash I ever had up to that moment. I mean, it really, again, it always stayed with me because it was just so real and so strong. But of course, I had no idea why. Flash forward a few weeks into the summer, one morning, my boss says, "Today, Chuck, you're taking your bunk on a creek walk." Well, I grew up in Northeast Philly. I don't know what a creek walk is. And but it is what it is. The creek's only about a foot and a half deep. You take the kids out, they put their bathing suits on, they go and they splash around and have fun. It's a hot day. It's wonderful. Sounded fun to me. We we finish breakfast. We change into our bathing suits. We head down to the creek. All the kids are running in and they're right away. They're splashing around. They're having a great time. I set one foot in there. I had the pretty much one of only 2 or 3 panic attacks, and maybe the first panic attack I had ever had in my life. I was frozen. I basically stood. I just had to get out of there. I couldn't because I had to watch the kids. But I had a really bad panic attack. And again, no explanation, no reason why. In that regression, gee, why did I have those reactions when I was a camper 7 years earlier? Well, let's see. Because let's start with the panic attack. Because one of the times in my life, that the hypnotist took me to was I was 13 or 14, and I was walking along the bank of a creek, and I slipped. And it wasn't like the Colorado River rapids, but it was a moving body of water. And there was like a rocky, the bank was kind of all rocks. And I fell into the water and I washed up downstream on the other side. And I'll never forget, as I was like out, I was laying on the bed in the hotel room and with my head up, against the backboard, but my feet in front of me. And the second that as I described that happening, my body curled into the same exact position that I saw myself in as a kid on the bank of the creek. And then later on, he goes, "Well, let's go to another significant event in your life." And he goes, "Where are you?" I said, I'm in a tree. I'm like outside. I'm looking. What are you doing? I'm looking down. He goes, "What are you looking at?" I said, "It's like a fire." And I saw like the huts of, and the fire. And he goes, "Well, what is it?" I go, "It's some sort of ceremony." And he goes, "What? Well, what is it?" And I said, "Sorry, I got a call." I said, "It's a funeral." He goes, "Whose funeral?" I said, "My funeral." And again, that explains so much. And also, just to kind of put a button on it, as they say, I only thankfully have one that I know, I know of, but the only real phobia I've ever had in my life, in this lifetime, is balance. I was never a tree climber or fence climber. I mean, it's embarrassing, but I was like 9 or 10 before I could take the training wheels off the bike because I would have panic attacks, really, but not as bad as I had that day.
Yes.
But I was uncomfortable. I mean, I was scared because I had the balance. I don't ice skate. I don't roller. I never roller
Yes.
skated, ski, anything that has to do with keeping balance. I was never able to do. Clearly, that was why.
That was one of the reasons why. Now, let me ask you a
Yeah,
question. Do you have a
sure.
fear of water?
No, no,
No, just
because
the,
I didn't drown. Because it was a creek, so there was no
yes.
danger, and I was only in the water a little bit. So no, I mean, I've never had a problem. I swim. I go. I mean, I don't like
Okay.
the ocean, but it has nothing to do with that. It's just to me, just no, I don't enjoy it, but not because.
Interesting.
Yeah.
Right.
So
So there's
that's
always,
so.
I found that the fears, and even it's interesting because if somebody said, "Oh, I have a fear of balance," that wouldn't make any sense. But you understand why it makes sense, because what happens is, when we have something traumatic, and it could be even a small trauma or a very large trauma, traumatic death can be a very big trauma. It is our emotions that we're feeling. So if we're startled and we hold fear, and whatever happens, that's what I've found that carries over. So I call it like a soul imprint. We bring the feelings and the emotions with us, and that's what's triggered, those feelings
Yeah.
and the emotions that go with it that we can't explain. And they can come out in a lot of different ways. Even riding a bike, maybe you had a real fear of taking the training wheels off, but everyone else is doing it, so you're looking and thinking, okay, it's safe, but
But
you're
I
hesitant.
remember I would grip the handlebars like as tight as I could. I remember
Right.
I had an little older friend, a few years older, who at one point when I was a teenager, 16, 15 or 16, got a motorcycle. He said, come on, let's take a ride. He probably still has my fingerprints, the impression, because I held on. I was just panic stricken, because I was not firmly planted on the ground. Yeah. Can you
Okay.
still see me? Because for some reason I can't see me anymore. So I just want to make sure that
I
you
can
can.
see you.
Okay, that's all that
Yes, I
matters.
can
I know
see
what I
you.
look like. It ain't
Great.
that much to look at. So okay.
So I'd like to now, let's get to what I think is the most interesting part of your story, your past lives. And when you did contact me, this was one of the big things that stood out to you. Let's go right to the experience of Gettysburg and
Okay.
how you first came into even that feeling of something that may have happened, and then what we'll go into what happened in our session and what you really found out about that.
Okay. So another short story. I will promise I will make long. But okay. So when I was a kid, well, not just when I was a kid, but when he was alive, my father's absolute best friend. So much so that I grew up calling him Uncle Lenny. And Uncle Lenny was a Civil War guy. He was fascinated by the Civil War. And one day in the summer of 1965, he decided that he was going to, I mean, I'm sure it wasn't his first trip, but he was going to go to Gettysburg battlefield, which of course is about a 2.5, 3 hour ride from Philadelphia. And he asked my dad to come along. He goes, if you want, Chuck wants to, he's welcome. And I guess it sounded cool. Battlefield. Yeah. I thought I was going to see, all kinds of great stuff. And so we go there, and it's a very long ride. And again, when you're 9 years old, it's like, 3 hours is more like 3 months. And I don't know if you've ever been to Gettysburg battlefield or just that part of the state in the summer. It's the South. It's brutal. It was like 90 degrees, humidity to match. And I'm 9 years old, so I can't really comprehend the what Gettysburg and the Civil War really, really was all about. I mean, I knew that we fought the southern states and we won, blah blah blah. But it was basically just a lot of grass and statues that I mean, and occasionally it was a cool old cannon. So yeah, that was pretty interesting. But by and large, and if you've never been there, there's a loop, probably a 4 or 5 mile loop around the battlefield. We're on this loop around the park, stopping at different places along the battlefield, and finally we get to a point that's called Devil's Den. Devil's Den is a series of large boulder formations up a hill, maybe about, I don't know, 50, 60 feet up a hill. Maybe I'm not really good at measurement like that in my mind. But you walk up a small hill, and at the top of the hill are these different boulder formations. And in front of one of them is like an easel, small easel, with a photograph of the corpse of a Confederate soldier. And I look at it, and Uncle Lenny had his camera with him. And I haven't acted out in any way. I mean, I was a little bored, but I wasn't, being, a kid about it. Oh, I want to go home. It was what it was. And I look at that picture, and then, I mean, I don't even remember. It wasn't like a conscious decision. I walked over to that exact spot, which was only a few feet away, where the body was laid out. And I laid down in as close approximation to the position of the corpse. And I wouldn't get up until Uncle Lenny took my picture. Now you have to understand that this picture is it's absolutely the most famous and iconic photo of the Battle of Gettysburg, and probably one of the two or three most iconic of the entire Civil War. So much so that I'm sure you recall Ken Burns 35 years ago did
Hmm.
the massive 10-part, documentary on the Civil War, and they probably showed 1,000 photos, probably 100 photos per 10, for 10 episodes, thousand, at least 1,000 different photographs. That was, as far as and I've watched it several times. It's the only photograph that I remember they actually used twice. The first time was literally within the first 2.5 or 3 minutes of the first episode. So that's how famous this shot of this Confederate soldier is. Now, he took the picture. I never saw it. I don't have it, unfortunately. And So, but whenever in the ensuing decades, whenever I thought, Gettysburg was mentioned or I saw it on TV, I always thought back to, because, and I wouldn't get up. I'm sure I can't imagine what my father and Lenny were thinking, because there are other people there. And I will, come on, Chuck, go, let's go. We got to go. No, take my picture. I mean, they must have thought I was like having a psychotic episode. But I always remembered that. And now, flash forward, I think it was like 2007, 42 years later, I'm at the Courier Post, and one of my regular assignments, I wrote like once a month, a road trip story, just, tell people this is where you can go, but, without having to stay overnight. And I decided to go to Gettysburg. And I took my buddy with me because he's self-employed internet guy, so he could come and go as he pleased. And I told him the whole story. And we get up finally. We're doing the loop. We get, and that's all I'm talking about. I can't wait to go back. We get there, and I'm just looking at this. I'm there where I was when I was a kid. I mean, it's not like I thought I was the soldier, but there was something that I was feeling out of the ordinary. That it was very powerful. And and I said, as I said, there's the picture on, on this easel kind of thing that explains, that what the significance of this particular group of boulders is. And I swear, it's not like I thought. This was not a conscious gesture. I took my thumb and I put my thumb that so it covered in the photo below the nose of the soldier. And I know that generally, I mean, physical resemblances are not really a past life thing because, you could be a white male in this life and a Chinese female 3 lifetimes earlier. But there's a really strong resemblance to the corpse's face and mine below. The chin line was different, but the nose, the arch of the eyebrows, the hairline, and when I was in my mid-20s, it was really similar. And that just convinced me more and more that that's why I did that when I was a kid, why I reacted like that, when I was 9 years old. And then, of course, I came to you, and we discovered that yes, apparently, that I wasn't, fantasizing that probably was me in that photograph.
Yeah.
And I do have one. I think I told you in the email. I do have one little punchline to it. I have a friend who is a very serious guy, and he's not serious in demeanor. He's actually got a great sense of humor. He's a lot of fun to be around. But in his work life, it's very serious. He's actually one of the world's leading counterterrorism experts. So again, he deals with very serious things. And so I never really, and I don't see him that often. I haven't seen him for like 2 3 years now, and even I mean, never do we regularly in touch. And so I never told him about this because I figured that this guy is not the one who's going to be receptive to this. So now it's been about 2 years. This is probably about 6 8 years ago already, but about 2 years. It's been about 2 years since we've actually spent time together, and probably a year and a half since the last time we'd even talked on the phone. And I was in the car one day going on an assignment somewhere. I had some time. I figured, oh, I'll call Paul. And remember, we hadn't talked at all in about 18 months. And I call him. He answers the phone. He doesn't even let me say hello. He goes, Chucky. He goes, I can't believe you called. He goes, I like 6 months ago, I had the craziest dream about you. And at first I said, well, should you be telling this to your therapist? He goes, no, really. He goes, it was the nuttiest dream. And it was like so vivid. I said, okay, what was it? He goes, you and I were in the Civil War together. I said, I never said a word. I said about all this. I said, really? That's pretty wild. I go, were we in any like battles? He goes, yeah. I go, where? He goes, Gettysburg. I said, and which side did we fight for? He goes, you're not going to believe this. We were Confederate soldiers. And that just blew me away. That
Wow.
he unsolicited. And this made such an impression, psychically on him. This dream that he had,
Yes.
which was probably like again, like the film clip of what past life. that was he couldn't even say hello. He had to tell me about this, that we were in the Civil War together. So I
So,
found that to be pretty interesting.
and I'm going to ask you real quick, and then we're going to go to discuss that past life that we had that I was witness to as well, that I guided you to. Did you tell him your story then?
No, I'm not then because I didn't want to. I don't think I had the time, or I would have rather probably done it. I'm pretty sure at some point I did, but I didn't feel that it was the right time then because
Okay.
probably just simply because I might probably wouldn't have had enough time to really get into the weeds with it and something like
Exactly.
yeah. So
Exactly.
no, so I at that point I didn't tell him, but obviously you can imagine how blown away I was because of all
Hmm. It's a
to
validation too. I think when the
absolutely yeah.
universe
Why
gives
would he?
us
Right. Why
exactly.
of all things,
Yes.
yeah, okay, fine. So we were in the Civil War together, but maybe we were stationed, in Chicago, at a, or Wisconsin. I mean, not every soldier in the Civil War fought in Gettysburg, and not everyone was a Confederate soldier. So
Yes.
that just blew me away. Yeah.
So now let's go to the time that we met.
Yep.
And I was, again, I was listening to the recording from almost over 10 years ago, that recording, and listening to the first lifetime that we visited. So
Yes.
when I meet with people, and I no longer do the three that I used to do because it's a lot. However, people, I let them go where they need to go. And people that come to me, usually if it's something pressing, whether it's a strong emotional response they're having to something like a phobia or a fear or anxiety or anything like that, or a pain, the higher self, the subconscious, will usually take them right there. Like the girl that had the injury. And I'm thinking that injury, what happens a lot of times too is we have that trigger at the same age that the past life was, and that can be a trigger for that, or an event or something that
Right. Sure.
happens that reminds us, like, oh my gosh, remember this. So that was that first lifetime that we visited. You had told me a little bit of the background of your story.
That I suspected there might be something there. Right.
Yes. So I did something with you that I normally don't do, and people might call it leading, but it is, let's go back to that time,
Well, no, you did.
because
But you didn't. No, you did it exactly the right way. I always appreciated that because if you did not say, "Let's go to when you were a Confederate soldier at Gettysburg,"
no,
or you said just the military that you were a soldier.
I said when you were a soldier. Yes.
Yeah,
Thank
right,
you.
right. Yeah.
Yes.
So that wasn't particularly. Yeah, I mean, it led me to
Mhm.
focus on being a soldier, but Gettysburg was and the Civil War were never mentioned.
Right, right.
Yeah,
So yes, yeah, let me clarify that too, because again, I did just listen to it.
right.
And the interesting thing is too, you were a soldier more than once.
Well, oh,
So
sailor. Yeah.
and that kind of opened everything, like, oh, okay, we've done this before. We've done it a few times, maybe even more that we don't know about. And so when we open up, you are and I'm going to ask you a little bit too, because listening to your voice, people might find it very surprising that they can be having this experience. So people sometimes think hypnosis is like you're under anesthesia, that you don't remember anything, that you're completely out. You're
No.
not. You're just really focused. Your mind has the ability to focus and concentrate and really relive something. At the same time, you're aware that I'm asking you questions
Yeah.
and you're answering them.
Yeah, I have very strong memories. I remember at one point when I described dying at Gettysburg, how I actually remember I trembled, and you can't make yourself tremble, but
Mm-hmm.
I absolutely started to tremble when I was describing the moment of my death. Yeah,
Yeah, and it was emotional. So listening again to your past lifetimes,
yeah,
I can hear the emotion, and that happens 98% of the time, because again, physiologically, we're re-experiencing something so strong that there will be crying, or strong
yeah,
emotions of loss, fear that can come back, worry, wondering, and we can remove ourselves from it. So it's usually after we die that we're like, huh, I'm in a tree and I'm watching myself at
right,
my funeral, or, oh, wow, this is what's happening to my body, which is what happened to you. So
right.
let's kind of set the scene for where we opened up. And you're a young man and you're in the Civil War. We know that because you described what you were wearing.
Yeah. You asked me, said, what are you wearing? And I talked about wearing a gray pants and a gray jacket. And I also, oddly enough, because I've never really, I've done some research on the soldier. But if anyone is interested in more in this soldier story, he's known in Civil War history circles as the Devil's Den sharpshooter. Now, there are people. There is some. There is a school of thought that they have. He died unidentified, so we don't know for sure because he had no identification on him. But there is an article or two that identifies him as being from Texas. But don't believe that. That's not true. I'm telling you, that's not the case.
Yes.
But and unfortunately, I couldn't remember. I think it's important to note here. I couldn't remember my last name.
Yeah.
Which is so frustrating to me. And that's why we're going to have to do it again just to see if we can. because that will, if I can get the last name, there are roles, there are rosters, military rosters in
Yes.
archives all over the country that will have this name in it if that's the case.
Yeah.
So,
and that's one of those times, right? With that very historic known person death and all of that to me is important. What I found over the years, just for our own healing and benefit, a lot of times when it's an ordinary person having some kind of extraordinary experience but not historical figure, that they a lot of times don't know their last name, sometimes even the first name, but your first name was Frederick.
Yeah, exactly. That came right away, but the last name and just wow. So anyway, but what struck me, one of the details was that I had a backpack, but I was wearing it in front, not on my back, which I thought was a pretty interesting detail.
Yes.
Not important necessarily, but interesting. And and so I was in the woods and I had been separated from other soldiers when I first entered into this lifetime, in the regression. I remember that. And then we went to the Battle of Gettysburg, and the story of the picture is fascinating. And this is documented. Excuse me. So if you don't know this, you see, and it's called the Devil's Den sharpshooter, and he's behind this boulder formation. So you assume that he was killed there and at the boulder. But the story is that there were the most famous photographer of the Civil War, of course, was Matthew Brady. But the number two guy was, I think, Alexander Gardner. And Gardner, the next day, I guess, after the first, I guess this was the second day of the battle, because it was part of the battle of what's called Little Round Top, I think. Anyway, that and I described this in the regression. I was actually killed. Articles say 40 yards. My memory, as it were, is it was probably 50 to 75 yards away in a field away from the rocks. And the gardener decided it would be an interesting picture to move my body to the rocks to take the picture. And I even you said, well, are the I said, well, there's guys and they're moving my body, and they said, are they talking? And I said, yeah, they're saying. He said, you said, well, what are they saying? I said, oh, this will make a great shot, a dead rebel, a dead reb. So that's historical fact that picture, that body was not originally at the site that it was photographed.
Yes.
It was moved. And then I guess right before that, I described the moment that, and this is known too, that the Confederate forces there at one point during that battle were in retreat. So I was actually shot in the back as I was running away.
Yeah. Yeah.
And I remember again, the exact moment. I said something like, I was alive and now I'm not. I think I said that. But
yes, you were very matter of fact. It's interesting because, again, if anyone's considering doing past life regression, if there's any fear of, oh, it's going to be so emotional, I don't want to have to go through death. There's a very much a matter of fact, because the soul has been through it many, many times.
Right. Yeah, exactly.
And and there could be, because you were also a young man. So it's funny because even in different stages of life, the soul itself too might say, that's interesting. Now, maybe when it's older, it might have some like, I don't want to leave my family, or there might be, those kinds of feelings and emotions. There was so much going on obviously in war, that at no time when I asked you, were you terrified being in war? It was more of, here we are. You'd been at war for 2 years, I remember. And
Right.
we kind of forget. We think the Civil War, you think of battles as just battles. There's a lot of downtime. There's a lot
Yep.
of wandering. There's a lot of,
Boredom. It's
trying to
mostly
get enough.
bored. Yeah.
Yes, yes. And I do remember when you were describing this pouch that you had. You called it a backpack, and I was laughing because I know that that's you carried stuff. I still have my great grandfather's Bible that he carried
Wow.
from the Civil War,
Oh my
and it
God.
was 1960. I'm trying to think of what year it was that he wrote in pencil, and I have that Bible, and I just think it's
Oh
fascinating. And he
yeah.
survived. He did survive, but men were given Bibles, and you also mentioned, I asked you what was in it, and you said a mirror. And you
Yeah.
said, I think it's for shaving, which I thought was so interesting, some biscuits and a pencil and some paper. And I asked you, what's the pencil and paper for? And you said,
To write letters home. And
yes,
you said, well, what do you write about? I said, how boring and how,
yes,
how pretty much awful this existence as a soldier is.
yes. How
Yeah.
you missed your family and how
Yeah. Oh,
awful
yeah.
it was.
Yeah.
Right.
And it was not, there was nothing glamorous about my
No.
life there. But here's what really convinced me, because again, of course, I sort of wanted this to be fact. Yeah, I really wanted to turn out to be this guy, because how cool is
Mm-hmm.
that? But the argument can be made. Well, it was wishful thinking. I was fantasizing it because I wanted it to be so. But here's to me what convinced me of the veracity of just that this really did happen. Because towards the end you asked about what my feelings were about fighting and dying in the Civil War, and my answer was totally unexpected. I mean, because it was a perspective that in this lifetime, I could have never, ever even, you know, conceptualized. It was so foreign to me. And what I said was that this wasn't about slavery, because we were poor. We didn't own slaves, but I think I said they tried to change our way of life. They meaning the
Yes.
Union,
Yes.
and the Union, the government.
Yeah.
And we couldn't allow that, and that's
Yeah.
why my friends and I enlisted.
Yes. Yes.
And that to me, because I've never in this lifetime I've ever considered that point of view
Yeah.
until that
Exactly.
moment. So that's what really convinced me that, yeah, as far as I'm concerned, yeah, I was Freddie. Absolutely,
Yeah.
no question
And
about it.
yes, and
And if
that's why it's so important during a past life regression when we always go to the death scene, because I
Sure.
say I need to know how you died and what you thought about that life, and then the soul part is able to really comment, like you said. I wasn't trying to come up with an answer. It
Right.
just came out, and it even surprised me because
Yeah.
when you're experiencing it, Chuck, and I like to ask people too, especially I'd like to know how it felt for you, because it's hard to describe to people afterwards. You're
Right.
like, well, I'm having this experience, but I know I'm there. I know I'm sitting in a chair, but words are kind of coming out of my mouth and I'm listening at the same
Yep.
time.
And
I don't know
and
what I'm going to say. I'm just
Yeah,
kind of
and
observing.
that just again, that to this moment, it just floored me, because you know, having grown up in the North in this lifetime, and
Yes.
I mean, uh, I would have never come across that point of view or that perspective in this lifetime. So that was, to me, that was 100% real and organic. That
Yes.
was how Freddie saw this. It wasn't about slavery at all, because again,
It
he said,
was.
we were poor. We didn't own slaves. Who owned slaves?
Mm-hmm.
But they tried to change our way of life.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
that to me was probably the most powerful moment, other than
Yeah.
the actual maybe physical death. The most confusing, I remember that I was confused as to why. I couldn't figure out, why were they dragging my body? What was that all about? Why did they just leave me alone? What were they doing? Why were they
Yes.
moving me? There was something else I need to say about that, though, about that regression, because as you know, my voice is not like this. It's. I remember I played the tape for a friend of mine years and years ago, and he kind of got freaked out because it was so not my voice. But I was not speaking in a Southern accent.
Hmm.
I wasn't quite speaking my normal Philadelphia accent, but I
Yeah.
wasn't speaking. I wasn't Gomer Pyle. And I maybe I misread it, and I should probably go back and check this. But I remember reading something not that long ago, maybe 5, 10 years ago, that the Southern accent, as we know it today, actually didn't really develop until after the Civil War, which is why Freddie. Oh, and one of the other things I thought was really interesting about what the questions you asked. You said, "Well, where did you live?" And I couldn't pinpoint it. I was saying Tennessee, Georgia, Alabama, and then I hit on. I remember saying it was like Brutonville, Bruton
Yes.
town, and one of the first things I did is probably that day. When I got home that day after the regression, I looked up Brutonville, Alabama, which is in the northeast corner, right. I mean, you could spit and hit Georgia, basically.
Wow.
Okay. But here's the really crazy thing about that. Again, I've never, the only place I've ever been in, or places in Alabama, are literally on the Gulf Coast on the water. So I never have been in northern Alabama. And I Googled Brutonville, and there is a Brutonville, Alabama, but it's not. It's kind of the same. It's actually part of Jacksonville, Alabama. Who knew there was a Jacksonville?
Right.
It's sort
Right.
of like Marlton and Evesham.
Yes. Yes.
So legally, it's although that's not a good example, I guess, because the post office in Evesham Township is actually the mailing address is Evesham. But the point is, there is a Brutonville, but it's not a legal entity unto itself. It's a part of another small little town called Jacksonville. So again, how would I know that?
Exactly. And
You
here's the
know?
thing: when you've done, you probably maybe visited those places or knew of that area. And talking about acts, meaning when you were in that lifetime.
Oh,
So
yeah.
you knew those areas and maybe visited or for whatever reason. And people don't. I've had people, I don't know, probably over 1,000 sessions with people. They don't speak the language. They don't carry
Right.
on the characteristics. They may, if it is someone, which is interesting, who maybe is a proper lady from the 1800s in England, will use verbiage, or she'll describe herself or her clothing in a certain way, which I find interesting.
Yeah.
Only once have I had this happen, Chuck, and I still I tell people about it because it's fascinating. A friend of mine who was a professor at LaSalle, very logical, intellectual thinking. He's also a bass player, though. Interesting. Um, and he's very creative, very artistic that way, but also just really science based. And we did a past life regression several years ago. He was curious, and I've known this man since I was 19 years old. He only went to Paris recently. He had always wanted to go to France, but his minor in college was French. But I've known him for years and years, never heard him speak French. We never talked about it. In one of his lifetimes, his name was Jacques, and he worked for the king. And his job was to commandeer the warships that would go out into the world
Wow.
and steal everything
Huh.
for the Louis the 13th or 14th, I think it was. I forget which
Wow.
Louis. And that was his job. And he spoke French the entire time. So I asked him questions and he answered me in French. And
Wow.
I just kept asking questions. I kind of could pick up a little bit here and there, but then I just kept asking, now what's happening? Where are you?
Right.
What's going on? And I thought, in my mind, I'm thinking, well, hopefully he'll be able to interpret it afterwards. But the fascinating thing was, I said to him at one point, can you speak English? And he replied, no, parlez-vous français? And I said, no. And he went, and he kept speaking French, just like a typical Frenchman.
Wow. Yeah.
And at the very end, when we were discussing it after Jim opened his eyes, he said, it was the weirdest thing. When you asked me, can I speak English? I remember thinking, I am speaking English. What is she talking about? So he fully channeled that
Right.
memory.
That's
But that was unusual. And of all the time that I've done this, it has only happened that one time where someone spoke a completely different language. But I've had people, I had a woman who, African American young woman, also a lesbian, who was a white male land and slave owner in the
wow.
1800s. Talk about
Oh
the
my.
karmic swing.
Yeah.
And I
Wow.
remember when I was asking in the opening scene, because you know how that is, you don't start when you're a baby, you start wherever you're going to start.
Right.
So we get right to the crux of it. Like, I'm at war and I'm walking around and I'm somewhere wearing a uniform.
Right.
And she was surveying her land. And I asked, what do you look like? Who, describe it. And she, in the chair, went like this: "It's all mine." She was
Oh.
looking out over the fields that she owned in Georgia and saying, "It's all mine." And she put one of her slaves to death and hung one of her slaves
Oh.
for stealing. And when I said this man did not feel, he did not want to do it. He said, "I don't want to do it." I said, "Why are you doing that?" He said, "Because that's what we have to do."
Yeah. The way
Yeah.
of life. There you go.
Yes.
That was the
So
way of life.
again, coming out of the mouth of a Black woman in 2020 or 2018, whenever that was,
Wow.
imagine afterwards, talk about being blown away. When she opened
Yeah.
her eyes, I said, "Well, did you expect any of that?" And we laughed, and she just went, "Oh my gosh." So we experienced all these different things. So even talking about being a Confederate, Southern way of life, you're now a Northerner living on the East Coast, having
Right.
a completely different life.
Yeah.
But I
And having
imagine
grown up,
now,
I mean, with, learning the history from the northern point of view as well.
yes,
Yeah.
exactly.
Yeah.
But I
So,
think because our souls are here to experience and to hopefully learn with each
yep.
experience, that it brought out more compassion or maybe more curiosity in you. Because being a journalist, I want to know about these things. I want to talk to
Absolutely. Oh,
people.
yeah.
I'd like to
So,
find out more about them.
yeah, and I still, what on my bucket list is to one day write an article, looking for Freddie, and
Uh,
to find out that, I mean, there are a number of reasons why I haven't done it yet, but everything in its time and its place. It's, when
yes.
the story's ready to be written. Just like with this, not that I want to keep plugging my band, but I've been playing bass longer than I've been writing. I've been playing bass since high school. I've played in bands 51 years now, but I've never played at this level. I don't mean technically, but I mean, all my life, if I played to 100 or 150 people, that was amazing. That was like crazy. I can't believe there's 100 people here watching us. And Pure Petty has played to as many as 3,000 people. And and in the past, it was always just playing in the dive bars, out on
Mhm.
206 or whatever, but now we played Woodstock. Last couple of weeks ago, we're going to a theater in Syracuse in September, so on and so forth. And it's just because now, even though I would have preferred this had happened 40 years ago when I was younger, and but it happens when it happens. So I know that I'll eventually, probably sooner and later at this stage of my life, because I'll be 69 in 2 weeks, that I will start to really do the research on Freddie. And part of it will be to do another regression to answer some of the questions that you just, for instance, I'm sure it didn't occur to you because it's not your normal thing. You never asked. Not that, I'm not trying to find fault with you, but it would have been cool if you had thought to ask or known to ask what unit was I in, because again, then I could research. The Seventh Alabama.
Right,
And
right,
I've personally narrowed it down to either the seventh or Alabama or the 15th Alabama.
right,
So I will be back,
right.
to
And here's the thing,
do that.
coming from a therapist who doesn't really know anything about the Civil War or
Yeah.
any army, I would never even think to ask that.
Oh yeah.
So
No,
if
I'm
you
not.
had a
Obviously,
therapist,
yeah.
right, just pointing that out for anyone watching that's interested in doing this, and helping other people, that I teach my students just to ask a lot of questions, what you would be interested in. Like you're a detective saying, "Okay, and then what
Yeah,
happened?
I
And
mean
now where are you?"
the questions you ask, and again, I don't fault you for that, so please don't take it as a
Oh, no,
criticism.
no.
But yeah,
No,
and that would be a key. If I can come up with what unit I was in, said the that name is on in an archive somewhere, somewhere in a book down south, in a historical society or a
exactly.
military college or
Exactly.
something like that.
Right.
Yeah, but
And I always say too that the higher self, the subconscious, whatever you want to call it, will give you the information they think is important for you to know. And
yeah,
sometimes you can try to ask, because I've had people over the years that have things they want to know, and they'll say, I don't know, it's not, I don't see it, it's not coming. And I always say that's okay, it's probably just not important right now. Maybe it'll come to you later, and then we keep moving.
right,
Because people then, I don't want them, even though they're in that state, to get frustrated thinking like, why isn't it coming? When you were trying to sound out your last name,
yeah,
Garrison, it ends
yeah,
with an O-N.
right,
But all of those things, again, when we've had hundreds maybe of experiences, of our souls have had many, many experiences. Now even it's coming through like a filter of the imagination too. So we're trying to gain the information by what's coming through us. Before we wrap this up, I just want to bring in a couple of things that I've noticed that we've been talking about, kind of pieces of the puzzle. And so we're not going to discuss it, but I know that the recording also, you went to a life in Ireland and you were a
yes.
writer and you had a
Oh,
very
so short.
pleasant
Yeah,
life there. Yes. And you
yes,
also saw your wife in this life, Robin, as your wife in that life,
yep.
and your daughter in that life as
My
well.
older
So that
daughter. Yeah,
happens. Yes, that happens not all the time, but it does happen a lot where we just know. And
yeah.
yes, you just know, oh, that's
That
Robin. I
also
know it's
happened
her.
in when I was the Native American, and he says, "Do you see anybody, or do you have anybody from this lifetime?" And I immediately saw my older brother, who in that life was my younger brother.
Yes. It's
Yeah,
so interesting again how, and I tell people, and I know that for a fact now, well, for myself and for my research, when we have those encounters, even maybe when you first met your wife, there was something there and you felt comfortable. You felt, oh, I know you. There, you are gravitated towards each other because the souls recognize each other. And that happens all the time with when you go back and you go, oh, yes, I know them. I know their eyes. There's something very
right.
familiar about them. And
But
you can
actually,
easily,
if we have time, I do have a kind of an interesting story, and it's pretty quick, I think, I hope. But it's funny you mentioned that, only because that really wasn't the case with Robin and me. Not that strong, but literally 8 weeks, not even 8 weeks. Yeah, it was like Christmas day after Christmas, or so it was like 6 weeks before Robin and I met. I was at, if you remember Robert Hazard and the
Mhm.
Heroes. I was his road manager time. It was the day after Christmas in 1982, and Rob and I met February of '83. And he was playing at Steven Starr, the famous restaurateur. Before he opened restaurants, he had a nightclub on South Street, music room called Ripley Music
Oh,
Hall,
yes.
600 blocks there.
Yes. Iconic.
And when you walked in, so you walk in the front door, and running to you along on your left, there was a door, a couple of doorways, and that was the music room. That was the venue itself that ran the length of the building. But when you walked in the front entrance, right in front of you was a staircase that kind of wide, maybe about 6 feet wide, that took you to the second level. And right at the top of the steps, about maybe 5 or 6, 10 feet maybe off of the top, the top, when you first got to that second level, was a bar. And at one point, I was upstairs, I'm walking down, and this young woman walks past me, and I was just flabbergasted by her beauty, and there was something that just drew me to her, mostly because she was absolutely drop dead gorgeous. Again, before I met my wife. But she was walking up the steps. Next to her was a guy, and they definitely looked like a couple. So, all right, that's showbiz. A little later, I went back upstairs, and I see her standing in a group of maybe 4 or 5 people, one of whom was a friend of mine, Michael Tierson, the disc jockey, who was
Hmm.
WMMR, who I've known for 50 years now. And she's one of like this group of, like, I said, like four, maybe 3 or 4 people who are kind of talking to him in this little circle. And I noticed that the guy isn't there. So I joined the circle. I can, because Michael's my friend. So it's not like, who is this guy? Mike. I say, hey, Michael, how you doing? Blah, blah, blah. And I kind of make sure I stand next to her. And 5, 10, 15 minutes pass, and the guy isn't there. So I start talking to her. We wind up leaving the show to go to another bar where we can really sit and talk. Now, what's the most cliche line a guy usually says to a girl when he's trying to get
Yeah,
something
right,
going
right.
with him? I feel I've known you forever. Right? The most bogus bull BS line. We're sitting at this bar having a drink, and like after like 10, 15 minutes, she says that to me. Oh my God. Okay, fine. This is Saturday night. And finally, she goes, she looks at the clock. She goes, I got to get home. I said, well, can I see you again? She goes, I would love to. But she goes, I'm leaving tomorrow morning for Myrtle Beach, South Carolina. She had gotten a job at a radio station there. And that was the last time I ever saw her. But I will always believe, with all due respect to my wife, who we've been married 43 years now, I truly believe that, again, that was no accident, that this young lady, Lisa, and I definitely had at least one, if not more, lifetimes together. And
Exactly.
we at that moment, our lives we had to meet and pass just to kind of let each other know that, hey, we're okay. Here we are.
Exactly. Yes.
And
Yeah.
I'm probably hope maybe I'll see her again. I
Yeah.
probably wouldn't be
Yeah.
sympathetic, but I truly believe that was what that night was all about.
Hmm.
That we were together in a past life, and we needed to see each other just to know that we were alive and fine.
Yes.
And
Checking
yeah,
in.
yeah, and
Just checking
checking.
in. How
Yeah,
you doing? How you doing? And
exactly.
I
Yeah,
and I also believe that our souls have a lot of things already, the path that we know we want to take, and the people that are going to help us on that path. So
absolutely.
people that would say, oh, is it meant to be or not meant to be? You were
Every,
meant to be with somebody else, because if we weren't
everything could.
happy, and maybe thought, oh, or had regrets or whatever, but we are with the people, they're helping us in some way and teaching us, and we're doing the same thing with them.
Well,
We're
well, I
learning
mean,
from each other.
but that's the bottom line for me with my having this belief in reincarnation, the meaning of life. Everything happens or doesn't happen for a reason. As I tell people, my line is, yeah, there is no such thing as coincidence other than you wake up in the morning, you got a song in your head, you go out in your car later, you turn the car on, and that song is on the radio. That's coincidence. But when it comes to real things and people, there ain't no coincidences. Everything and sometimes things aren't meant to happen. And if I may, well, because it's germane to this, right at that same time, I'd worked, as I mentioned earlier in the beginning, my first job was at a paper called the Philadelphia Journal, which went out of business. It folded 10 days before the concert when I met Lisa. And at that time, right around that same time, I got a call from a buddy who was working at a newspaper in Fort Lauderdale. Now, I was 25, I was single, I had nothing keeping me in Philadelphia. I started, including a job. And he called, he says, look, they just fired their music writer. You could have this job in a moment. And I never pursued it, which is bizarre. Why wouldn't I want to go and live in, Fort Lauderdale and be a music writer down there? But I never pursued it. And 6 weeks later, I met Robin.
Exactly.
Yeah,
The soul knows and will override, and
absolutely.
you just don't feel it. You don't have that
No, but that's
feeling.
it. And that was
Yes.
something that was meant not to happen. I wasn't
Right.
meant to go to Lauderdale.
Right. So I
Yeah,
think it's important, and we're going to wrap this up in a
yeah,
minute. This has been great. That when you follow your soul, I think and whatever that means, when you have that feeling of, no, this isn't supposed to happen, this doesn't feel right for me, or I really need to pursue this. And so many times I think we ignore that. And then that's when we find ourselves in situations where we're not happy or things aren't
yep.
working out, and we're frustrated. But
Yeah.
I think it's
The soul knows. Absolutely.
and because it just feels right.
Yep.
However that means in your body, it feels right for you.
Yeah. Mm.
Yeah.
If I may, just one last thing, I think that is germane to this conversation. That so I've been regressed totally to 4 different lifetimes. The second, the sailor, most recent lifetime in the 40s. We didn't really get too much into the personality of that guy, but the other 3, I was absolutely the same person. at essence. To say absolutely, and you even said, is Chuck with you, or is Freddie with you today?
Yeah.
And I said,
Yeah.
absolutely, because we were. That was me. The same, in the depths. The essence
Yeah.
of who I am and how I conduct myself and how I see things, especially relative to other people. It was absolutely me. It was not, who is that person? No, that was me.
Exactly. Exactly. I'm
Uh,
so glad we were able to do this today and talk
Me
about
too.
things, validations of things, because I was actually thinking of kind of retiring from this work a little bit.
Meh,
And all these things
no.
recently with past lives have been coming up. And then out of the blue, you instant
Yeah.
messaged me and said, "Are you still doing past life regression?"
Yeah.
And I
And what
said,
happened was,
"Okay, I
yeah,
guess I need to keep doing this."
because I went and I saw that you had asked me to do this. And the last time we communicated was on Facebook, Messenger, 2017. And you said, "Hey, I'm doing this. I do this, like, YouTube or podcast, whatever it was.
Right.
Would you like to come on?" And I love doing this because I love hearing myself talk, obviously. But 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 I don't understand why I didn't. So I said, if you're still doing it, I would love, because I love talking. Obviously, I love talking about this. To me, this
Hmm.
is everything. This is the meaning of life to me.
Yes, this is the juicy stuff.
Yeah,
This is the
this is
juicy stuff. And I don't
yeah.
even remember that at all. But
Well, it
again,
was in the
now,
messenger, yeah,
right. So it's
but
here
because it was
now.
meant to
And
be. Everything in its
right.
time and its place,
Yes.
Barb.
Yeah. And so what I love to do now is really teaching others, because I feel like the more people I can train, the ripple effect of going out
Yep.
into the world and going all over parts of the world and being able to help people with this as well, because I really do think it helps to transform the consciousness of the planet.
If only more people, because they've been indoctrinated by religion, basically,
Yeah.
they won't allow themselves to explore this.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
what a better world it would be if they did.
Exactly, because I think it really helps to alleviate suffering and to help people understand more about
Yep.
themselves and their purpose. And I think that's the big thing. So thanks,
Well,
Chuck.
thank you. No, thank
And
you, Barb. Thank
we'll
you
catch
for,
up again.
real soon, I promise.
Yeah.
All right. Bye, everybody.
Bye.